Hello, my dear listeners. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, I am going to tell you the story of the gentle life of Thomas Jefferson, a peaceful bedtime story. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to support my channel. Alright, let's get started. Chapter 1, A Boy in Virginia, 1743 to 1757. Long ago, in the quiet hills of Virginia, where green pastures rolled gently into deep forests and sleepy creeks sang their lullabies, a boy named Thomas Jefferson was born. The year was 1743, and the world was much quieter then. A world of wooden farmhouses and misty mornings, of crickets and fireflies, and of peaceful days that drifted along like clouds. Thomas lived at a place called Shadwell, a tidy home surrounded by towering oaks and fragrant pine trees. Birds would perch in their branches and chirp warning songs as golden light streamed into the windows. On chilly evenings, the family gathered around the fire to listen to the gentle popping of the logs as the sparks danced upward, the joy of the outdoors as a child. Thomas loved to wander outdoors. Some days he walked along deer trails through the forest, his hands brushing against mossy trunks as he paused to watch squirrels leaping from branch to branch. The rustling leaves told him their secrets, and the distant blue hills called to him like old friends. He especially liked to climb a hill near home where he could see forever, the green hills and winding rivers spreading into the horizon. The breeze would ruffle his hair as he gazed out, wondering what lay beyond the farthest hills. In those quiet moments, he felt both small and grand, like a tiny star in a very big sky, a house full of books inside his home surrounded by warmth and gentle light. There were books. Many, many books. Even as a boy, Thomas liked nothing better than to settle into a chair with a volume of poetry or history. By the firelight, the worlds in those pages glowed in his imagination. Knights and philosophers, explorers and inventors. They all kept him company before bedtime, like whispered stories telling him to dream. And so the house at Shadwell was filled not just with people, but with dreams and ideas as well. Even when the world outside was still and sleepy, Thomas felt alive with thought. Every morning, his mother would gently wake him, and every evening he'd go to sleep with a head full of gentle, stirring wonders, learning to ride and explore when Thomas was a bit older. His father showed him how to ride a horse. How thrilling it was to feel the gentle clip-clop of hooves along a country path, to smell the sweet grass as they crossed wide meadows. Side by side, they'd ride to visit neighbors or inspect the crops, pausing to admire the smooth hills where white clouds glided across the blue sky's dot. In those days, the rhythm of life was slow and kind. Seasons changed like chapters in a sleepy storybook. The green of spring gave way to the warm gold of summer, then to the amber of autumn and the crisp blue light of winter. And Thomas? He watched it all with careful eyes and an open heart. Lessons beneath the trees, Thomas had a clever, curious mind. Even though there were no grand schools nearby, he learned from his surroundings. Beneath the shade of grand oaks, he listened to his father's stories about the past. Near a bubbling brook, he practiced his letters and numbers. Sometimes when the day was especially bright and breezy, his father would point at the hills and ask him to imagine what was beyond them, to wonder, to dream, to learn. And that's what shaped Thomas most of all, the gentle encouragement to explore ideas like he explored the hillsides. Every question was like a seed, and every answer was like a leaf unfurling toward the light. A peaceful evening as night came to Shadwell. The house glowed warmly against the dark. Crickets sang outside the windows, and the breeze whispered lullabies through the trees. Thomas would curl up in bed, his heart full of the day's gentle wonders. A squirrel's leap, a story his father told. A new thought sparked like a firefly in the dark, and as sleep pulled him into its gentle embrace, the hills and books and bright morning light were already waiting for him in dreams. Chapter 2, the college days at William and Mary, 1760s, in the sleepy town of Williamsburg, where brick paths crisscrossed beneath shady elms and lanterns glimmered warmly after sunset. A 17-year-old Thomas Jefferson began his days as a student at the College of William and Mary. The year was 1760, and though Thomas was still quite young, his heart and mind were alive with the hunger to learn. A candlelit world of learning, the college itself was like a peaceful sanctuary. Its brick halls held centuries of gentle tradition, wooden desks smoothed by years of hands, narrow windows that let the morning light spill across ink-stained pages, and shelves of leather-bound books that smelled faintly of dust and dreams. Here, Thomas felt as though he'd stepped into a quiet, enchanted world. He spent long days studying Latin and Greek, poring over histories and philosophies by candlelight as crickets sang outside. The other students would sometimes doze off after long lectures, but Thomas was too curious to sleep. Every sentence was a door to new knowledge, every idea a star in the deep sky of his thoughts. Walks beneath the trees when lectures ended. Thomas liked to take gentle walks across the green campus. He followed paths that wound past centuries-old oaks and gardens blooming with lavender and sage. Birds chattered in the branches overhead, and the gentle rustle of leaves kept him company like a distant melody dot in those quiet hours. Thoughts would come to him like whispers in the breeze, questions about the nature of freedom and the rights of man, long before he ever wrote them down. Though these thoughts were still like tiny seeds, he tended them carefully as one might tend a secret garden. Music and friendship when the day softened the evening. Thomas and a few close friends would sometimes play music together. Thomas himself played the violin, drawing a bow across the strings to fill the candlelit room with warm, gentle notes. The tunes they played weren't grand or showy. They were simple and sweet, like a lullaby for the soul dot, and when the final notes faded into the dark, they'd sip tea and speak softly of books they'd read, of history they admired, of futures they dreamed. Even in these sleepy moments, Thomas was learning, listening to others, sharing thoughts, and feeling the bonds of friendship grow, a mentor and guide during this time. Thomas was lucky to find a kind and wise teacher named Professor William Small. With gentle encouragement, Professor Small opened Thomas's eyes to new worlds, science, reason, and careful thought. They would take long, slow walks together across the college green as the sun set, discussing the great thinkers of Europe and what new ideas might grow in the young colonies of America. Professor Small's voice was soft and sure, and his guidance felt like a steady light to follow in the gathering dusk. Each conversation was like a lantern glowing on Thomas's path, and those lanterns would burn in his memory for the rest of his life. Dreams beneath starry skies, and when night finally fell over Williamsburg, Thomas would return to his small room in the college, where a single candle glowed on the wooden desk. Outside his window, the moon and stars kept their gentle watch over him as he read and thought and wrote. The world was so big and so quiet, and Thomas felt as though all its wisdom was right there, waiting to be discovered, and so wrapped in the gentle peace of that place and time, he would finally lay his head down, close his eyes, and drift into sleep. The distant hoot of an owl and the soft hush of the night breeze sang him to dreams full of possibility. Chapter 3. Practicing Law and Early Public Service, 1767 to 1775. By the time Thomas Jefferson was in his 20s, he had left the gentle halls of William and Mary behind and returned to his beloved home in the hills of Virginia. The hills were the same as when he was a boy, green, rolling, and full of breezes that carried the songs of birds. But now, Thomas felt a new sense of purpose stirring in his heart. The young lawyer in 1767. Thomas began his practice as a lawyer. His office was simple and quiet, stacked with papers and well-thumbed law books. Clients would come and go, their voices hushed and hopeful as they told him of disputes and hardships. Thomas listened carefully, hands folded on his desk. His voice was low and calm as he guided them toward peaceful solutions. Though law could be serious, there was gentleness in Thomas's work. He wasn't interested in arguing for argument's sake. He wanted to help people. Every case was a puzzle to solve. Every client someone who deserved fairness and understanding. And after each long day of study and work, he would look out his window at the sunset hills, his thoughts as peaceful as the landscape itself. The first steps into public life, Thomas also began to serve in public life, elected to the House of Burgesses, a council that discussed the future of the colonies. The Burgesses met in Williamsburg, beneath ceilings that glowed with warm lantern light. Thomas was often quiet during these meetings at first, listening to the more experienced members speak. Yet his thoughts ran deep, and when at last he rose to speak, his words were measured and true. He spoke of liberty and of people's rights. He spoke of the need for change, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. And in those candlelit halls, surrounded by serious men in serious wigs and coats, Thomas felt the same stirring of purpose that had come to him as a boy when he looked across the hills toward a distant future, gentle evenings at Monticello, when the day was done and his duties were paused. Thomas would ride home up a winding road to his hilltop home, Monticello. There, in the golden light of evening, he found his peace. He liked to walk among the trees, listening to the crickets and feeling the breeze play at his sleeves. He liked to pick up a favorite book and read by the window as the sky faded from pink to deep blue, and as the house grew quiet and the fire burned low in the hearth, he would reflect on the day. His hands had held law books. His voice had spoken for those who hoped for fairness, and his heart was already hoping for more, for a nation where everyone could live in peace. The whisper of history, even then, as a young lawyer and public servant, Thomas Jefferson felt that history was stirring around him like a sleepy breeze. He could sense that important days were ahead, that the hills and towns of Virginia, so calm in the twilight, might one day change forever, and so he listened. He listened to the wind through the oaks, to the voices in Williamsburg, to the steady rhythm of his own thoughts. And when he finally lay his head upon his pillow at night, the stars glimmering like tiny lanterns outside his window, he felt both sleepy and hopeful, as if the world were humming a lullaby that only he could hear. Chapter 4. The Declaration of Independence, 1776. By the summer of 1776, a breeze of change was stirring across the American colonies. Thomas Jefferson, now a thoughtful and respected man in his early 30s, had traveled to Philadelphia to join a gathering called the Continental Congress. The city was alive with voices and hopes, and the warm light of summer glowed on the cobblestone streets. A quiet room in Philadelphia in a small upstairs room, far from the busy clatter of the streets, Thomas sat alone at a wooden desk. A blank sheet of parchment lay before him, and a quill pen rested in his hand. Around him, the summer air was soft and gentle, carrying in the faint scent of grass and distant river water dot. And then, with a deep breath, he began to write. Each word formed slowly and carefully, like notes in a quiet song. He read of liberty, of self-evident truths, of people deserving to live free and seek happiness. The ink glistened by the light of a single candle, and outside the window, stars began to twinkle one by one, writing into the night. The clock hands moved across the hours as Thomas rode into the gentle dark. Every sentence was like a ripple on a calm lake, spreading his hopes across the page. He paused often, gazing out at the summer sky and listening to his thoughts settle like fireflies glowing in the distance, died in that sleepy, hushed room surrounded by silence and purpose. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. And as Thomas wrote, his heart felt both light and heavy. light with the promise of a new beginning, and heavy with the responsibility of choosing each word so carefully. The next morning, when morning came and the parchment was finally complete, the room was filled with soft light and the sound of distant bells. Thomas looked at the words before him, words that would one day change history, and a quiet, hopeful smile touched his lips. He carried the parchment to the gathered Congress, and they listened as it was read aloud. The room was solemn, yet full of energy, and every ear heard the gentle strength in those sentences. Together, they embraced the Declaration, a simple sheet of parchment that held the dreams of countless people, a whisper in the evening. And so, as the sun set on that historic day, Thomas found himself alone again, walking slowly along a peaceful Philadelphia street. The breeze was cool on his face, and lanterns glowed warmly in nearby windows. He thought of his hilltop home at Monticello, of the green hills and the long evenings spent with books and music. He thought of what was to come, the struggles, yes, but also the possibility of a gentler, freer future. And under the sleepy glow of the rising moon, with his heart quiet and hopeful, Thomas felt a deep peace. He had given voice to a new idea, one that would live far beyond him, and as he closed his eyes that night, the world outside seemed to hum a quiet, grateful lullaby. Chapter 5, Monticello and Family Life, 1780s. The hills of Virginia glowed warmly in the light of the afternoon sun as Thomas Jefferson returned home to Monticello. By the 1780s, he was more than just a lawmaker. He was also a husband, a father, and the gentle master of a quiet hilltop estate. A home filled with light. Monticello was a beautiful house, perched high on a green hill that overlooked sleepy valleys and winding rivers. Its windows shone like friendly eyes at dusk, and from its porches one could see forever. Within its rooms were shelves and shelves of books, maps that invited travel, and a spinning globe that reflected the whole wide world. Yet, what Thomas loved most were the gentle sounds of family. His wife Martha's soft laughter filled the halls. The children padded barefoot across wooden floors, carrying toys and stories in their hands. And when evening came, they would gather together by the hearth, reading aloud as the firelight painted their faces in gold. Gardens and gentle work by day. Thomas loved to tend the gardens that surrounded Monticello. He delighted in the soil, beneath his fingertips, in the green leaves of herbs and the bright blooms of flowers. He showed his children how to plant seeds and watch them grow, a small miracle that took patience and care. Sometimes they'd wander together along the vegetable paths, picking fruits and vegetables for supper as robins sang overhead. And when the summer rain fell, soft and sparkling, they would shelter together under a broad porch, listening to its gentle rhythm, music in evenings by candlelight. When the day was done and the hills were hushed, Thomas would take up his violin and play by candlelight. He loved the sound of gentle strings vibrating through the house, a melody as warm as a lullaby. Martha might hum along, and the children would listen until their eyes grew sleepy. And after the last note had faded into the dark, they would kiss one another goodnight, their hearts full of that quiet, musical peace, dreaming of the future, though. Thomas cherished these calm days at Monticello. His thoughts often drifted beyond the hills. He thought of his hopes for the new nation that was growing across the land. He dreamed of schools where all could learn and gardens where children could play freely. And most of all, he dreamed of a world where his own family could live in peace. Forever. And when at last the house was still and the lanterns were blown out, Thomas would climb into bed feeling tired and content. He listened to the gentle sighing of the wind through the trees and felt deep in his heart that this was the most wonderful kind of wealth, a home, a family, and a future full of possibility. Chapter 6, Life as Minister to France 1785-1789. When the gentle hills of Monticello were behind him and the great ocean waves had carried him across the sea, Thomas Jefferson found himself in a very different world, the grand, elegant city of Paris. Paris by candlelight Paris in the 1780s was like a dream painted in gold and marble. Its streets bustled with carriages and cobblestones, its cafes glowed with lanterns, and its gardens shimmered with fountains and statues. Yet, even amid all this splendor, Thomas brought with him a quiet, thoughtful spirit. He took up his work as America's minister to France, a role that was full of polite conversation and careful diplomacy. Each day, he attended gatherings where powdered wigs and silken coats rustled around him, and gentle words were exchanged like gentle breezes. And when the grand halls emptied and the day was done, Thomas would retreat to his rooms with a warm drink and his books, savoring the quiet after all the noise. Long walks and gentle conversations when the skies were bright and blue. Thomas liked to stroll through the gardens of Paris. He especially loved the Tuileries Gardens, where broad paths wound beneath. Flowering trees and elegant chairs were scattered along the gravel. There he could breathe slowly, admire the green life that sprung up around him, and listen to the distant murmur of fountains. Sometimes he walked with new friends, scholars, artists, and other gentle minds, sharing ideas and dreams as they moved beneath the dappled light. Thomas listened more than he spoke, his thoughts swirling like soft winds through tall branches. Learning from a new world in France, Thomas discovered so many things to admire. Music that filled grand halls and quiet salons alike, art that glowed from canvases and peaceful galleries, architecture that soared like a dream into the blue sky. Each new experience felt like turning the page of a beautiful book, and each day held a new surprise to treasure. Yet even as he delighted in all this beauty, part of him missed his home. Across the ocean, the hills of Monticello, and the gentle company of his family, dreaming of home when night fell over Paris, and its lanterns glimmered like sleepy fireflies along the Seine. Thomas would often stand by his window and look at the starry sky. He thought of his hills in Virginia, his gardens and library, and the way the firelight must look in his family's sitting room, and he hoped that one day, when his work was finished and his duties were done, he would return to that peaceful world and live quietly once more, surrounded by the hills and books and gentle sounds that felt like home. And with that warm thought close to his heart, Thomas would at last blow out his candle, sink into bed, and drift into a deep and restful sleep, his dreams carrying him across ocean and hills to the gentle places he loved most. Chapter 7, The Presidency, 1801 to 1809. When the turn of the new century arrived, America was still a very young nation, like a green sapling with its roots spreading slowly into the soil. And in 1801, Thomas Jefferson was chosen to be its third president, a quiet, thoughtful leader for a time of gentle growth and change. A gentle beginning, Thomas began his presidency not with grand parades or noisy celebrations, but with a simple and heartfelt speech beneath the clear, blue sky of Washington. He spoke of freedom and fairness, of listening and learning together, his words like a peaceful morning breeze across a meadow. And when the crowd dispersed, Thomas found himself once again in a quiet room, this time at the president's house, surrounded by papers, maps, and books. He paused at the window, listening to the distant sound of birds and feeling the sunshine on his face. Even with so many important duties before him, he hoped to lead with the same gentle care he had brought to his family in his gardens at Monticello. Everyday moments in Washington each morning as president. Thomas rose early. He would take slow walks through the small, growing city of Washington, past brick buildings and along green hills that sloped toward the Potomac River. Sometimes he paused to admire a stand of trees, or the gentle ripples on the water. Small moments of peace that helped him begin his day. In the offices, he worked carefully with his secretaries, answering letters and reading reports from every corner of the nation. And every so often, when a difficult decision had to be made, he would lean back in his chair, close his eyes for a quiet moment, and remember the hills of home, drawing strength from the simple beauty of nature, the Louisiana Purchase. And a growing nation during these years, America was expanding like a broad river winding into new lands. In 1803, under Thomas's careful guidance, the nation purchased the Louisiana Territory, an immense stretch of prairies, hills, rivers, and forests reaching far to the west. When the papers were signed and the news was shared across the land, Thomas felt a gentle thrill. He thought of the explorers, like Lewis and Clark, who would soon travel across those distant hills and valleys, and he hoped that as the nation grew, it would do so peacefully and with respect for the world it found. Quiet evenings as president. Though his days as president were busy, Thomas loved the quiet evenings best of all. After the lanterns were lit and the house had grown still, he would take up a favorite book and read by the light of a single candle. And sometimes, when the day had been long and his thoughts were full, he would pick up his violin and play a gentle melody that echoed softly through the halls. And as he finally laid his head on his pillow and closed his eyes, he thought of the nation he had helped to lead, and of his own beloved Monticello waiting for him, peaceful as ever across the hills and under the gentle Virginia sky. Chapter 8, Retirement and Books, 1809 to 1820. When his presidency ended in 1809, Thomas Jefferson felt a gentle relief, like a traveler finally returning home after a long and important journey. He left the bustle of Washington behind him and climbed once again into the hills of Monticello, where the green grass and old trees welcomed him as an old friend. A peaceful return to Monticello back at Monticello. Life moved slowly and sweetly. Every morning, Thomas would rise to birdsong outside his windows and take a leisurely walk across his estate. He paused often to admire his gardens, the neat rows of vegetables, the twisting paths of wildflowers, and he felt his heart grow, lighter with every breath of clean mountain air. His home was a sanctuary. Its halls were quiet and familiar, its rooms filled with sunlight and soft breezes, and everywhere there were books. Books on history and science, architecture and philosophy. So many books that they nearly touched the ceilings, like a forest of knowledge. A life among stories and ideas. Thomas spent long, gentle days reading and writing at his wooden desk. He wrote letters to friends, exchanged thoughts with scholars across the ocean, and sometimes simply sat by the window with a favorite book, listening to the wind and the trees. He was especially fond of arranging his library, carefully placing each volume on its proper shelf. To him, those books were like cherished friends. Every one held a world of ideas and memories that kept him company. And when his grandchildren visited, he would share these worlds with them too, telling stories, reading aloud, and answering their curious questions with patience and warmth, new dreams and gentle work. Even though his public life was over, Thomas never stopped thinking of the future. He dreamed of building a new kind of school, one where students could learn freely under broad skies and leafy trees. And in these years of retirement, those dreams began to take shape as he planned and designed a place that would one day become the University of Virginia. Each evening, as the sun painted the hills in golden light, Thomas would walk out onto his porch and look toward the distant horizon. He felt a deep sense of peace, the quiet satisfaction of a life spent in service, surrounded by learning and beauty and always looking kindly toward the days ahead. And as night slowly settled around him, Thomas would make his way inside, extinguish the last lamp, and let the house grow still and dark. Outside, the hills kept their gentle watch, and Thomas drifted into sleep, wrapped in the sleepy hush of his beloved Monticello. Chapter 9, founding the University of Virginia, 1819. By the time he was in his 70s, Thomas Jefferson had begun to focus his gentle, tireless energy on one last, cherished dream, creating a new kind of school. He hoped to build a place where light and knowledge would grow together, like green hills kissed by morning sun. A dream on paper seated at his wooden desk in Monticello, Thomas sketched careful drawings of his dream. He imagined graceful buildings with columns like trees and lawns as green as meadows. He pictured students and professors walking together beneath shady oaks, sharing questions and ideas as they went, and with every stroke of his pen, he thought of the future, of the young minds who would one day come to this place and feel the gentle magic of learning. Designing a home for learning, Thomas visited the chosen site often, a broad hill not far from Monticello, and walked its paths as they took shape. He guided every part of the project, choosing each brick and window so the buildings would fit into the landscape as naturally as wildflowers and a meadow dot. He planned the rotunda, a library shaped like a domed temple, as the heart of the school. And surrounding it, he arranged a peaceful village of pavilions and gardens where students could live, read, and dream together. A gentle start when the University of Virginia finally opened its doors in 1825. Thomas was filled with quiet pride. The buildings glowed warmly in the sunshine, and the green lawns invited gentle footsteps. Young students began to arrive, bringing with them all their bright hopes and questions. Thomas would often visit, moving slowly across the grounds. With a walking stick in hand, he liked to listen to their excited voices and to see them read beneath the trees. And though his steps were slower than they once had been, his heart was light and hopeful, a legacy planted in the earth every evening as the sun set, painting the hills purple and gold. Thomas thought of what this school might grow into, a place where learning was forever alive, like a fountain that never ran dry. And though he knew his own days were becoming few, it comforted him to know that the university would live on long after him, like a strong oak sheltering new generations. And as the sleepy crickets began their song and lanterns glowed warmly in the windows, Thomas would return home to Monticello, his soul filled with gentle satisfaction. He had given the world a quiet gift, one that would grow and grow long after he was gone. Chapter 10, A Calm Farewell, 1826. The years rolled by like soft hills under a sleepy sunset, and Thomas Jefferson spent his final days surrounded by the gentle peace of Monticello. He would sit in his favorite chair by the window, looking out at the green landscape and distant blue hills, feeling the warmth of the fading sun upon his hands, a life complete by 1826. Thomas was an old man, his hair white as morning mist, his voice quiet and slow, yet his heart was full of gentle memories, of books read by firelight, of gardens planted in springtime, of distant travels and quiet walks through green forests, and most of all, of a nation that had grown and flourished like the mighty oaks. Outside his window, he knew that the time was near to say goodbye. And so, one soft summer morning, July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the very day after America had declared its independence, Thomas Jefferson closed his eyes one last time, and though he left this world, his hopes and dreams would live forever, carried onward like a whisper in the breeze. A gentle goodbye of the hills and the gardens at Monticello stood peaceful and green. The birds sang their gentle songs, and a sleepy hush fell over the house. And just as the sun began to sink beyond the hills, the skies glowed pink and gold, as if to wish him a warm farewell. And as the stars appeared, twinkling softly in the dark, it felt as though all of history had paused for a moment, a quiet, restful pause to remember a gentle soul who had given so much. And so our bedtime story comes to a gentle end. Dear listeners, as you drift into sleep tonight, may you dream of green hills and glowing lanterns, of kind thoughts and quiet days, and of a world forever inspired by gentle hearts like that of Thomas Jefferson. Sleep well, dream sweet dreams, and I'll see you again in the next bedtime story. Good night.